European auto oil. Why do we have a group of oils called European auto oils? Why don't we just use API, SN rated engine oil in our European autos?
Because Europeans are weird.
They have different specs.
Yes, they have different specs. I heard the answer. And in the European world, they use what's called ACEA. And the reason it sounds kind of strange is it's actually from French, and I can't possibly say it correct, but it is the Association of Constructors Automobiles European, ACEA. So we turn that around in English and just call them the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. Okay? So, but they continue to use the abbreviation letters of ACEA, which comes from the French, and that's why it doesn't seem to make sense when I say they're the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. Well, how do you get ACEA out of that? You don't. You get ACEA out of the French term. All right. It's the European organization that determines the specifications of oil. The same way the API here gives us the classification of oils, our current one for a gasoline engine is the SN rating, and for a diesel engine, we're at CJ4. But the Europeans, they have a few more. They have A1, A2, A3, A4 for gas. They have B1, B2, B3, and B4, and no, wait a minute, B1, B2, B3, and B5 for diesel. Then they have C1, 2, 3, and 4 to protect the modern fuel emission systems that we would call the DPF systems and the catalytic converters and the uric acid, all those. That comes under a classification called a C. Then they have one more that's called heavy duty diesel engine classifications, E5 through 9. Okay, so in other words, I'm not even going to try to go into the details of each one of those. They are full of details. And if you ever wanted to think about details, just look at how often Volkswagen gives us a new spec for their simple TDI engine. It's like every other year, well, it's a new VW 503.719 odd 6, you know, whatever it is, but it's another spec from Europe on another quart of oil that was different than what it was last year. Okay, now, you can understand that because they chose in the European model to have all these different ratings, they do it for a reason. They like to make oils that can be classified as extended drain. Do you know any API classification for extended drain oil? No, because API doesn't even admit there is one. Okay? So they have extended drain oils, they have high performance, high efficient oils, they have all kinds, then they have low economy grade oil. So when BMW calls out for a particular spec, like an A3 B4, there's a specific definition of what that oil has to meet. It's a high performance turbo diesel rated type oil. A is for gasoline, B is for diesel. Okay? So the point is, they get really into a variety of specifications. They don't have a one shoe fits all. They really have a lot of specifications. So along comes a new problem in the C-rated oil I was talking about. We have C1, 2, 3, and 4 for protecting emission systems. They came out with a new thing called regular SAPS, medium SAPS, and low SAPS. Now, I know everybody thinks, who are all these SAPs, right? Bunch of SAPs from Europe. No, here's the point. SAPS is a term, I get this right, it's sulfated ash, phosphorus, and sulfur. Okay? Now, when you make a modern engine oil, you put additives in the oil. And part of those additives are such things as zinc, phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, different things you put in there. Now here's the point. What the industry calls an ash is if I burn all the oil and there's residue left in the planchette that I burned it in, that's ash. Well, things like phosphorus, sulfur, zinc, these things don't really burn. They leave an ash in the thing. So they've always been referred to as the ash. In other words, the non-burnable additives that are in the oil. They're called ash. That's why when we talk about sometimes in two-cycle oils, we'll use the term ashless. That means it doesn't have anything that'll be left when it burns.
Right.
So low ash, ashless. Now, we come right over to this SAPS stuff, and what they're talking about is that they have decided in the European manufacturing to protect catalytic converters and protect these enhanced pollution control systems that come on the European cars, that they have to protect them from these additives in the oil being carried over and poisoning these catalytic converters and these systems, right? So they've decided how to do it. Now how did the API do this? Anybody know? The SN oil is limited to how much of this stuff? Anybody remember? 0.8% or 800 parts per million. That's the new limit we have over here, and that would be called in Europe a full SAPS oil. 800 parts per million or more in the European is a full SAPS oil. Now, if you look at our oils here from AMSOIL, we have a full SAPS, a medium, and a low. The full SAPS then would tell you right off the bat, if you were trying to figure it out, it's going to have more than 800 parts per million. Zinc, phosphorus, and these different types of additives that would leave an ash, right? So it's pretty close to the original oils we're used to. It's got sufficient, more than 800, where our limit is 800, their bottom end is 800 to be normal SAPS. So that's a normal SAPS oil. It's got plenty of zinc, phosphorus, and sulfur in it, okay? Now, the medium one, you can read different numbers, but the best I can find, and I'm not quoting this as categorically, but it's around 500 parts per million of these additives that would be in the mid-grade one. Now the low SAPS, best I can determine reading all the criteria, it's about 200. So obviously you know why the low SAPS oil costs so much? Because you can't protect the moving parts with 200 parts per million of zinc, phosphorus, and even sulfur components. You can't do it, okay? So what do? You have to add expensive anti-wear additive, just like we do over in the two-stroke ashless oil, which end up being things like organic moly, end up being things like high-performance anti-wear polymers, which will burn clean in the combustion process. Those things are expensive. So all of a sudden you look and you say, well, my goodness, this reminds me of diet food. Because the less there is, the more it costs. And it's true, the European low SAPS is the most expensive. The mid SAPS is middle, and the full SAPS is the cheapest of the group. But I'm getting more for less, or I get less for more. Well, that's very true. But the problem is in the low SAPS oil, we still have to protect the moving parts. So if I can't use the classic zinc dithiophosphates in there, then I have to use something else. And it turns out the other stuff you have to use is very expensive. So if anybody asks you, well, why does this one cost so much more, these European oils, than the other one? That's the reason, okay? So now, here's the point. Don't sell somebody a low SAPS oil for one of these engines that actually requires full SAPS. Because the problem is that 5W30 with the low SAPS probably isn't going to give adequate protection to one of the older engines that needs the high zinc and phosphorus. It's just like we talk about in motorcycles. We say, oh my God, don't use these new modern engine oils in your motorcycle. It doesn't have enough zinc and phosphorus. Okay, it won't protect it. Well, that's the same thing here. So what did AMSOIL come out with this third oil for? Got to give AMSOIL credit on this. They came out with this third oil because they actually want to protect these European cars as they should be protected. So the 540 high SAPS is perfectly set to pass all the requirements for the European specifications and have enough additives in it to protect those types of cars. Those types of cars. Whereas the mid-grade one, 540, you've got some mid-grades in there, but again, the Europeans call it out. They put it in their spec, so you don't have to worry. If a European car has a spec, and I think you'll see it on these oils It's actually right under where it'll have like the BMW spec, the Porsche spec, VW spec, these different specs. Those specifications lead to one of these oils. So here's the best way to deal with European auto oil. Use exactly what the manufacturer calls for. Don't vary from it. We have 3 oils that will meet the requirements. Just give them what their manual says. Stick with exactly what it calls for.
They don't have the SAPS in it?
Yeah, well, what they have is, like if there's a BMW, and Mercedes has these numbers like 328 or 325 or 321.7 or these kind of numbers, right? That's a number spec. It'll go right to one of these.
Yeah.
Okay, and on our data bulletin, we have those listed. Okay, so you can go right to the data bulletin and see which one of the European specs are listed under that oil. And that's the best thing to do. I mean, we went back and forth with the Volkswagen oil like it was going crazy for about 3 years. Or, oh, we're up one time, no, we can't do it now, yep, we can fix it. Oh, no, they changed again, I gotta go over here. It was difficult, but they've settled down some now for the use. So the best way to handle European auto oil, sell them what it calls for in their manual, and just be happy that we've got the 3 types of oil that's required. Now, there are plenty of older Volvos and BMWs and stuff that are like the 1980s, 1990s, that they simply have an API oil listed in their book because it wasn't that fancy at the time. So a lot of our, and if you look on some of our signature series oils, they actually have A1, B1, or A2, B3. They have a European thing sitting there. So if the car says in its owner's manual, use a European engine oil rated A2B3, and you look on our 10W30 signature series, it says A2B3, obviously that's good, okay? They have different requirements, different things that have to be specified. Now, could I say that there's a number of our signature series oils that might pass all these things? Quite possibly, quite possibly. But we're in a situation where it's not worth the money for AMSOIL to run around testing every one of our signature series oils against these 400 different requirements coming out of Europe. They just decide to make 3 that'll cover all the requirements coming out of Europe and don't worry about it. Because
Is it extended?
No, European oils are for the longest duration offered by the European manufacturer, which many times is 15,000 miles.
Okay.
The European auto manufacturers, that's the reason they have all these oils. See, they'll have an oil that they've specified, which is an extended drain high-performance oil. They did it so that it could go 15,000 miles. So they know that in Europe. But here, we wouldn't have an API-rated oil that would go for 15,000 miles. So we wouldn't have one to meet it based on the API ratings. So we'd have to go find somebody that claims they meet the European rating. Well, we meet the European rating. So if the manual for the car says in that BMW, run this oil 15,000 miles and it meets A3B4, whatever it is, and we meet A3B4, then run 15,000 miles. That's why AMSOIL says for these oils, run it a maximum duration allowed by the European auto manufacturer. And that's usually much more than what you think. But then, well, not to change it every 3,000 miles. They haven't changed oil at 3,000 miles in Europe in 20 years, okay? They just don't do it. I mean, their average oil change runs around 12,000 miles, okay? And that's why they have all these very tight specs. Our one shoe-fits-all API rating is a joke. It needs to be changed. They need to have much broader controls on that so that people can actually qualify for stuff. For example, if the API had a rating for an extended drain oil, we would be in like Flint because all of our signature series would be rated for that top rate extended drain. But the API gives you an SN, one size fits all. And it really doesn't. It becomes the minimum spec to qualify. And it means that's what you get, is the least quality to meet that, rather than having levels that you could meet for your oil to qualify and show that you were better oil. Why do you think they do that? Really?
Big brother.
It's money. Exactly. Follow the money trail. There's nobody out there. What's the term? They've commoditized petroleum oil, making it a commodity rather than a competing product that competes with each other on quality. We'll just make it a commodity everybody has to buy it. It's kind of like milk. If you like the one that comes from Hart's Dairy, or if you like the one that comes from Jones Dairy, or whatever it happens to be, but it's still milk. It's just a commodity. And that's what they've tried to do with engine oil in the United States. Not a good idea. That's harder on the consumer. The consumer has to go figure out and do their own due diligence to figure out which oil is better than the other one. The Europeans set it right up for you and say, if this oil is, you know, A4, B5, C4, E7, it's the best oil made, you can see from the ratings, and you can't beat that. It's extended drain, everything you want, right? They can get it and see it, and consequently, European oils on the average in Europe are much more expensive than our one-shoe-fits-all here in the United States. So, anybody got any more questions on European oil?
Does the SAPS technology, or that word, is it commonplace, like we go into these European repair garages, do they know this, or is it like the deer in the headlight things?
Good analogy. No, listen, some of these, I found this with a lot of the European auto mechanics, especially like we deal with some guys that are BMW mechanics and so forth. They are exceptionally trained. And I don't know why that is, that the ones I run into are just so well trained, but they do understand it because they've had to work with all of these oil specs for some period of time. Like one of the guys we know spent 28 years at the BMW dealership. Well, see, they've got to, all this stuff for warranty, they got to make sure they're meeting all this stuff. So their mechanics have to keep going to school on what all these different requirements are because they want to keep that warranty in effect. And they're doing the service on most of these cars in the BMW place, and they have to find an oil, an American oil, that will meet those requirements because they don't usually import that except for Mercedes. Mercedes imports their own Mercedes oil, but BMW, they're using, like one of the places that I know was they had a contract with Valvoline for a while, and then they shifted to Mobil. So they're paying attention to those specs. But will all of them understand the new SAP stuff? Probably not. But you could probably get a piece of literature to hand to them that would explain it. There's a pretty good article in the latest Action News by one of the guys on what the SAPS is, you know, that system is all about and what it's based on.